The Middle East is burning once again, and this time Lebanon finds itself at the epicenter of a conflict that threatens to reshape the entire region. Hezbollah drags Lebanon into war, and the consequences are catastrophic. 1 million displaced. Israel plans largest ground invasion since 2006, and the international community watches as another nation crumbles under the weight of decisions it never truly made for itself. I am bringing you the full story today, breaking down every angle of this devastating escalation, because what is happening right now in Lebanon is not just another chapter in an endless cycle of violence. This is something different. This is something that will define the future of the Middle East for decades to come. And as your anchor through this unfolding crisis, I want you to understand exactly how we arrived at this moment, who made the decisions that brought us here, and what comes next for the millions of innocent people caught in the crossfire. Let me take you back to March 2nd, when everything changed. Hezbollah made the fateful decision to launch missiles and drones into Israel, triggering what military analysts are now calling the most devastating Israeli response since the 2006 Lebanon war. In just 3 weeks, more than 1,000 people have been killed across Lebanon. The numbers are staggering, almost incomprehensible, and yet they only tell part of the story. Nearly 1 million Lebanese citizens have been displaced from their homes or forced to flee with whatever they could carry as Israeli airstrikes rain down on communities across the country. To put this in perspective, we are talking about 1/5 of Lebanon's entire population uprooted in less than a month. These are not soldiers, these are not militants, these are families, children, elderly grandparents, shopkeepers, teachers, doctors, and ordinary people whose lives have been completely shattered by decisions made in Tehran and Jerusalem and Washington. The scale of Israel's military response has been extraordinary by any measure. Israeli forces have launched extensive airstrikes across virtually every corner of Lebanon, from the densely populated southern suburbs of Beirut to the agricultural heartland of the Bekaa Valley and the entire southern region bordering Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces have deployed 3 full armored and infantry divisions to the Lebanese border, a massive concentration of military power that signals the seriousness of their intentions. Ground operations have already begun in southern Lebanon, and Israeli officials have made their objectives crystal clear. They intend to seize the entire area south of the Litani River, a strategic buffer zone that Israel has long viewed as essential to its security. A senior Israeli official made a chilling comparison when describing the planned operation, stating that what Israel intends to do in Lebanon mirrors what it did in Gaza. For anyone who has witnessed the systematic destruction of buildings and infrastructure in Gaza over the past year, this comparison sends an unmistakable message about the level of devastation Lebanon can expect in the weeks and months ahead. I want to be absolutely clear about what I am reporting here, because the humanitarian situation unfolding in Lebanon right now demands our full attention and understanding. The country's already fragile infrastructure has been completely overwhelmed by this sudden displacement crisis. Lebanon was already struggling economically before this conflict began, dealing with the aftermath of years of political dysfunction, a collapsed banking sector, and the lingering trauma of the 2020 Beirut port explosion. Now, overnight, the nation must somehow accommodate nearly 1 million internally displaced people who need food, water, shelter, medical care, and basic human necessities. Hospitals are overflowing with wounded civilians. Schools have been converted into emergency shelters. Roads are clogged with desperate families trying to escape the bombing zones. And the international aid organizations that typically respond to such crises are struggling to access the areas where help is needed most because of ongoing military operations. This is a humanitarian catastrophe of immense proportions, and I want every viewer to understand that behind every statistic I share with you today, there are real human beings whose lives have been forever altered by this conflict. The story I'm telling you is not abstract, it is viscerally, tragically real. Hezbollah drags Lebanon into war, and the Lebanese government has responded with actions that would have seemed utterly impossible just weeks ago. For the first time in the nation's history, Lebanon's political leadership has publicly condemned Hezbollah and officially banned the group's military activities within Lebanese territory. This is a seismic shift in Lebanese politics, a moment that historians will study for generations as they try to understand how a powerful militant organization that had operated with virtual impunity for decades suddenly found itself isolated and condemned by the very government alongside which it had functioned for so long. Prime Minister Nawaf Salam took the extraordinary step of demanding that Hezbollah surrender its weapons to the state, a demand that Hezbollah has resisted through multiple wars, multiple diplomatic initiatives, and multiple United Nations resolutions over the past 40 years. The Justice Minister went even further, formally requesting that Lebanese security forces immediately arrest anyone involved in launching rockets from Lebanese territory into Israel. Think about what this means. The Lebanese government is now treating Hezbollah's actions as criminal rather than as legitimate resistance, a fundamental reframing of the political narrative that has defined Lebanese politics since the Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon in 2000. Even more remarkably, Nabi Berri, the parliamentary speaker who has been Hezbollah's closest Shiite political ally for decades, allowed his ministers to vote in favor of the ban. This is a man who has stood by Hezbollah through every crisis, every confrontation, every moment of tension with Israel. His decision to permit this vote signals a profound break in the political coalition that has protected Hezbollah's autonomy for so long. Israel plans largest ground invasion since 2006, and Lebanon's political establishment has finally been forced to choose sides in a conflict that allows for no middle ground. The fury directed at Hezbollah is not limited to Lebanon's political elite. What I am hearing from sources on the ground, what I am reading in reports from journalists embedded in Lebanese communities, and what I am seeing in footage from displacement camps across the country reveals something even more significant. Ordinary Shiite Lebanese citizens, the very community that has formed Hezbollah's core base of support for 40 years, are openly expressing rage and betrayal toward the organization that claims to protect them. These are people who have lost everything. Their homes have been destroyed by Israeli airstrikes. Their neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble. Their children are traumatized by the constant sound of explosions, and they are asking a question that would have been unthinkable just months ago. Why did Hezbollah do this to us? Why did an organization that claims to defend Lebanese sovereignty make a decision that has brought this level of destruction upon the people it supposedly protects? Hezbollah's leadership has attempted to justify its actions, but the explanations ring hollow for millions of displaced Lebanese citizens who are living in makeshift shelters, wondering if they will ever see their homes again. Naim Qassem, who has assumed leadership of the organization following the elimination of previous commanders in Israeli strikes, has framed the conflict as an existential battle. He has warned Israel against proceeding with its ground invasion, threatening severe consequences for any Israeli forces that cross into Lebanese territory. But the reality on the ground suggests that Hezbollah's threats may be considerably less credible than they once were. Military experts have noted that Hezbollah spent the months following the 2024 ceasefire rebuilding and rearming in direct violation of the terms of that agreement. Weapons caches were restocked, tunnel networks were expanded, missile systems were upgraded and repositioned. All of this suggests that Hezbollah's leadership had been preparing for this confrontation for a long time, perhaps viewing it as inevitable or even desirable. But preparation is not the same as execution, and the devastating effectiveness of Israeli airstrikes in the opening weeks of this conflict has clearly degraded Hezbollah's operational capabilities far more than the organization expected. Hezbollah drags Lebanon into war, and the displacement crisis has now spilled across international borders in ways that are creating entirely new complications for regional stability. More than 125,000 people have fled from Lebanon into Syria, crossing a border that has countless tragedies over the past decade of Syrian civil war. The composition of this refugee population tells its own story about the desperate circumstances driving people to seek safety anywhere they can find it. 93% of those crossing into Syria are Syrians who had previously sought refuge in Lebanon, now returning to a country they once fled because somehow, impossibly, war-torn Syria seems safer than Lebanon at this moment. The remaining 7% are Lebanese citizens who have never lived anywhere but Lebanon, now finding themselves as refugees in a foreign land. Israel plans largest ground invasion since 2006, and the regional implications of this conflict continue to multiply with each passing day. The Israeli military has issued evacuation orders that signal the scope of their operational intentions. For the first time, Israel has demanded that civilians evacuate areas north of the Litani River, a significant expansion of the evacuation zone that suggests Israeli planners are contemplating operations well beyond the immediate border region. Additionally, Israeli forces have specifically targeted Hezbollah's traditional stronghold in Beirut's southern suburbs, known locally as Dahye, ordering all civilians to leave the area immediately. The airstrikes that have followed these evacuation orders have been devastating, reducing entire blocks of residential buildings to smoking craters. Senior Israeli military officials have made no secret of their strategy, openly comparing their approach to the tactics employed in Gaza over the past year. They are not merely attempting to degrade Hezbollah's military capabilities, they are systematically destroying the physical infrastructure that has allowed the organization to operate, including residential buildings suspected of containing weapons storage facilities, command centers hidden beneath civilian structures, and the tunnel networks that Hezbollah has spent years constructing throughout southern Lebanon. The Lebanese government's response to this crisis has extended beyond political condemnations of Hezbollah to include active security operations against Iranian-linked personnel operating within Lebanese territory. Authorities have begun arresting and repatriating individuals connected to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the military organization that has served as Hezbollah's primary sponsor, trainer, and weapons supplier for 4 decades. This represents another dramatic break from past Lebanese policy, which generally tolerated Iranian presence and influence as the price of maintaining fragile domestic political arrangements. But the scale of destruction currently being visited upon Lebanon has apparently convinced government officials that the old arrangements are no longer sustainable. Whatever political benefits Lebanon once derived from its relationship with Iran and Hezbollah, those benefits have been overwhelmed by the catastrophic costs now being imposed on the Lebanese people. I am watching diplomatic efforts unfold in real time, and I must tell you honestly that the prospects for a near-term resolution appear extremely bleak. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun proposed direct negotiations with Israel, recognizing that only a negotiated settlement can end the immediate violence and prevent further loss of life. His proposal received no response from Israeli officials, who have made clear that they view military operations as the only appropriate response to Hezbollah's provocations. The Trump administration has expressed interest in using any potential negotiations as an opportunity to achieve something much larger than a simple ceasefire. American officials have suggested that talks could lay the groundwork for a comprehensive deal that would formally end the state of war between Israel and Lebanon, a conflict that has technically existed since 1948 despite multiple ceasefires and periods of relative calm. But this ambitious diplomatic vision seems disconnected from the immediate military reality in which Israeli forces are actively advancing into Lebanese territory and Hezbollah fighters are preparing defensive positions for the ground combat that appears increasingly inevitable. Hezbollah drags Lebanon into war, and the longer I examine this conflict, the more I recognize how many different actors bear responsibility for the catastrophe unfolding before our eyes. This is not a simple story of aggressor and victim. It is a complex tragedy involving decisions made in multiple capitals by leaders with conflicting interests who have repeatedly prioritized their own strategic calculations over the welfare of ordinary Lebanese citizens. Iran has spent decades cultivating Hezbollah as a strategic asset, providing weapons, training, funding, and ideological direction to an organization that serves Tehran's interests far more than it serves Lebanese interests. Israeli leaders have long viewed Hezbollah as an existential threat requiring eventual military confrontation, and they have seized upon the March 2 attacks as justification for operations they have been planning for years. American policy has consistently supported Israeli military actions while failing to develop effective diplomatic alternatives that might have prevented this escalation. Israel plans largest ground invasion since 2006, and the people paying the price for these intersecting failures are the million Lebanese citizens now living as refugees in their own country. The human stories emerging from this conflict are heartbreaking beyond anything I can adequately convey in this broadcast. I have reviewed footage of families loading children and elderly relatives into overloaded vehicles, driving north on roads clogged with other desperate evacuees, while smoke rises from neighborhoods they may never see again. I have read accounts of hospitals running out of basic medical supplies while doctors perform emergency surgeries by flashlight because electrical infrastructure has been destroyed. I have heard from aid workers describing conditions in displacement camps where thousands of people have no access to clean water, no sanitation facilities, and no idea when they might be able to return home. The infrastructure that normally supports daily life in Lebanon has been systematically degraded by weeks of intense aerial bombardment, and the challenges of rebuilding will persist long after the last missile falls. Even if a ceasefire were announced tomorrow, it would take years and billions of dollars to restore what has been destroyed in the past 3 weeks alone. The military dynamics of this conflict deserve careful analysis because they will determine what happens next. Israel's deployment of 3 full divisions to the Lebanese border represents the largest concentration of Israeli ground forces since the 2006 war, and the stated intention to seize all territory south of the Litani River suggests an operation lasting weeks or potentially months rather than days. Hezbollah has spent years preparing for exactly this scenario, constructing extensive tunnel networks, positioning anti-tank weapons in concealed locations, and training fighters in the guerrilla tactics that proved effective against Israeli forces in 2006. But the opening weeks of this conflict have revealed that Israeli intelligence regarding Hezbollah's positions and capabilities was far more detailed than the organization expected. Strike after strike has eliminated senior commanders, destroyed weapons depots, and disrupted communication networks that Hezbollah had believed were secure. Whether these early successes will translate into sustainable military advantages during a ground campaign remains to be seen, but the initial indicators suggest that Hezbollah's defensive preparations may be less formidable than their rhetoric has claimed. I want to address directly the question that many viewers are undoubtedly asking as they watch this coverage. Could this conflict escalate into a broader regional war involving other actors? The honest answer is that nobody can predict with certainty how this situation will develop, but the risks of further escalation are extremely real. Iran has significant equities invested in Hezbollah and will face intense domestic pressure to respond if Israeli forces succeed in degrading the organization's military capabilities. Other Iranian-backed militias across the region, from Iraq to Yemen to Syria, have already expressed solidarity with Hezbollah and could potentially open additional fronts against Israeli or American targets. The American military has reinforced its presence in the Eastern Mediterranean specifically to deter such escalation, but deterrence is never guaranteed to succeed. We are navigating a period of extraordinary danger, and every decision made by leaders in Jerusalem, Tehran, Washington, and Beirut will have consequences that ripple far beyond Lebanon's borders. Hezbollah drags Lebanon into war, and as I bring this comprehensive coverage to a close, I want to reflect on what we have witnessed together over the course of this broadcast. We have examined the decision that started this escalation when Hezbollah launched missiles and drones into Israel on March 2nd, triggering a military response of unprecedented scale. We have documented the devastating humanitarian consequences, with more than 1,000 people killed and nearly 1 million displaced in just 3 weeks. We have analyzed Lebanon's historic decision to condemn Hezbollah and ban its military activities, a political earthquake that would have seemed impossible just months ago. We have traced the displacement crisis across borders into Syria and examined the strategic calculations driving Israeli military planning. Israel plans largest ground invasion since 2006, and the trajectory of this conflict suggests that the worst may still be ahead for the people of Lebanon who have already suffered so much in such a short period of time. The diplomatic landscape remains deeply troubling for anyone hoping for a rapid resolution. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun's offer of direct negotiations has gone unanswered, and Israeli officials have made clear that military operations will continue until Hezbollah's threat is eliminated entirely. What does elimination mean in this context? Israeli spokespeople have been deliberately vague about their operational objectives, sometimes suggesting that the goal is to degrade Hezbollah's capabilities to the point where it cannot threaten Israeli territory, and other times implying that nothing less than the complete destruction of the organization will satisfy Israeli security requirements. The Trump administration's interest in using this crisis as leverage for a broader Israeli-Lebanese peace agreement represents creative diplomatic thinking, but such ambitious frameworks require willing partners, and Israel appears far more interested in military victory than in negotiated settlement at this particular moment. The stark reality is that this conflict will likely continue for weeks or months before any meaningful diplomatic progress becomes possible. I find myself thinking about the Lebanese people I have never met, whose lives have been upended by forces completely beyond their control. A Shiite family in southern Lebanon who supported Hezbollah for years, believing that the organization protected their community from Israeli aggression, now finds themselves homeless and betrayed by the very group they trusted. A Christian family in Beirut who had nothing to do with Hezbollah's decision to launch missiles nonetheless sees their neighborhood reduced to rubble by Israeli airstrikes targeting suspected militant infrastructure. A Syrian refugee who fled to Lebanon to escape one war now finds herself fleeing back to Syria to escape another, her children traumatized by violence that has followed them across borders and through years of displacement. These individual stories multiply across the million displaced Lebanese citizens, each one a unique tragedy that statistics alone cannot capture. As a journalist and anchor, my responsibility is to ensure that these human dimensions of the conflict remain visible even as we analyze the strategic and political factors driving events forward. The coming weeks will determine Lebanon's future in ways that the international community has only begun to recognize. If Israeli ground forces succeed in occupying southern Lebanon and establishing a buffer zone to the Litani River, the political and military landscape of the region will be fundamentally transformed. Hezbollah, which has dominated Lebanese politics for decades, may find itself so weakened that it can no longer function as an effective political or military force. But the destruction required to achieve such an outcome will leave Lebanon shattered, its economy devastated, its infrastructure destroyed, and its people traumatized for generations. Alternatively, if Israeli forces become bogged down in a prolonged ground campaign against determined Hezbollah resistance, the conflict could drag on indefinitely, creating conditions for broader regional escalation and ensuring continued suffering for civilian populations on both sides of the border. Neither scenario offers much hope for the Lebanese people who simply want to return to their homes and rebuild their lives in peace. This is the tragedy I have documented today, and I will continue covering every development as this historic crisis unfolds. Thank you for watching and trusting me to bring you this critical coverage during one of the most consequential moments in modern Middle Eastern history.